Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Deminar. Today's theme is going to be on institutional knowledge. That is information that's locked inside of mostly analysts' heads, but also subject matter experts, those that know the company, the domain, the use cases really well, and interpret what to do in a given situation and know what to do, but it's not necessarily codified, or definitely is probably not codified, and is not able to be used in an automation scheme or process. All right, so going to run through a quick demo here. This is the Jaxon Platform. I'm going to show you through the compliance guardrail. I've shown this in previous Deminars, but I'm really going to dig into the concepts around extracting context when it comes to questions. But let me back up and talk about our high-level flow here. What we're doing is we are using LLMs, and we can use any LLM. We're completely agnostic here. We've got an array of OpenAI models there. We're going to use the LLMs to be tools. They're going to help do things like extract information, determine the context of a question to be able to figure out a representative answer, because the question answer pairs are what we're ultimately going to be enforcing and using in our process that makes LLM outputs as deterministic as possible. And when we say that, and I've been saying this a lot lately, we're not expecting the LLMs to know the answer. So we're not getting the LLMs to become deterministic. We're using LLMs to arrive at the answer. And the steps that we're using them for, again, things around information extraction and summarization and interpretation, are where the LLMs really shine. But they don't have to have the knowledge of the domain in their weights, in their training data. They can be used to interpret things like this one right here, which is FINRA 2210, dealing with communications to the public, where it outlines a lot of rules. I mean, they're written in a format to start that aren't necessarily rules, they're more policies. What we're doing is leveraging the LLMs to turn that policy into a bulleted set of rules, and still in natural language form right here. And this is quite a long policy, so there are a bunch of rules that get generated from it. Then we turn all those rules into DSAIL, our domain-specific AI language. That's a proprietary language and a proprietary technique insofar as turning natural language into code that we can then use in a deterministic pipeline, in what are referred to as solvers. Solvers you can liken to good old math, where you're giving it a problem to solve. In this case, the problem that's going to be solved is the question answer pair in compliance with the rules, or do they, technically speaking, satisfy the rule? So we take these lines of code and we turn them back into natural language. So down here are a bunch of different questions that we're going to wrap up ultimately into a prompt and bring back to LLMs to find representative answers from new text or new documents that are being analyzed. In this case, we're going to show off a new email that's being written. So the answers, which you can think of, it's not directly an answer. It's more of the content within the document that represents what might be in violation of these rules. So I have this one open right here. Hypothetical illustration implies performance. So the question, does the hypothetical illustration definitively imply performance, is itself ambiguous. This is what I was talking about earlier, where the analysts have this locked in their head insofar as how to interpret what this question is really asking. So with Jaxon, we can get them to talk to an AI, to write it down, to interface enough so that we can capture the essence of their logic. And that logic is going to be captured here in this context, again, specific to this question. You can do that for every one of the questions that are generated from our system. So there is a bit of a setup period to get Jaxon's guardrails up and operational. Actually, I want to address guardrails. We call them guardrails, but they're set up to be evaluators. They are going to go out and use the essence of what we've created here to interpret whether or not something is or isn't in violation of a rule. So in general, we are enforcing rules. If we can codify it, we can enforce it. All right. So I'm going to take this over now to the agent layer. So what I was showing before is the Jaxon Platform. That's what developers, analysts, SMEs work with to capture all of the policies, rules, questions, and context. And now we're going to call on that from the agent. So via an API, we're calling on those rules to evaluate each new email that's coming through. And I ran this before the Deminar here. So I'm going to go down to the performance, the hypothetical illustrations, purely mathematical, or performance, projection, ban, and force. Both of these have failures. And we can then map it back to the guardrail, and it flags it for us in here insofar as which rule was tripped. And this is where an analyst can now dig in. This is where the humans still shine, is once something's flagged to interpret whether or not it is in fact something that needs to have actions taken on. Of course, you can automate this step as well, but we're finding bringing LLMs into workflows that historically have been predominantly manual or predominantly using perhaps older non-LLM solutions, that there are existing workflows that we don't want to replace entirely. We want to augment so that those human analysts or personnel members are more effective, not, again, replacing them completely. All right, so now that we have the flags here, we can do something with it inside a different application, in another agent, again, in some type of human GUI that will take these flags and adjudicate them or run through some type of process to take action on them. All right, that is today's Deminar. Do we have any questions? Okay, let me just see here. We've got one question talking about the rules. Okay, so the question here is, how does the LLM interpret the question to match up to a rule, which is a great question. So that's something that I've taken a while to truly figure out. And this goes back to what I was saying before about the LLMs are not being called upon to answer a question. We're not expecting them to know an answer. They have a terrible hallucination problem, which is the whole reason why we've created this approach. We are using them as part of a pipeline to arrive at that answer. So the LLMs in this case are interpreting, when I was showing before, if I could find it again, the hypothetical performance violation. Or here, let me go back to the email itself. This line right here, if I highlight it, this is talking about performance, hypothetical performance, but it's not using keywords that would typically trip say a lexicographical search or other types of approaches that have been taken to try to decipher whether or not this is in compliance with FINRA regulations. So the LLM really shines in interpreting that this subject line is in fact intimating performance and is something that should be matched up with that question and run through the solver to determine compliance or not. All right, any other questions? We have two more here. All right, let me tackle these. The next one is this a SaaS solution? The answer is not yet. We would like to have a SaaS come out in the not too distant future. We will. But right now, these are all on-prem deployments, which is a point I actually meant to bring up earlier. The LLMs that we have in the platform, we're agnostic to them. I showed OpenAI, but we can also use open source models where everything is is self-contained, air-gapped environments, if you will. And these models can run on your infrastructure or in your private clouds. So you have full control over the policies, the rules, and importantly, all that context that we're codifying. Which, by the way, I should add, the context that we're codifying is going to stay with the organization. So if someone, a subject matter expert, an analyst, were to leave the organization, this is a way of keeping all that context within the organization, which is why I'm calling the theme of this Deminar institutional knowledge. All right, this question is about the weights. So is there a feedback loop to adjust the weights of the model? I'm interpreting the question and rephrasing it. So that the LLMs that we're using are constantly learning. And this is actually a very relevant topical discussion that's happening right now. There's been some research at MIT that we can adjust the context and have a semantic layer that is not part of the LLM, so you don't have to adjust their weights. I think that there's going to be a balancing act that happens with this, where the small models, the small open source, pretty powerful language models that are out there that are in fact fine-tuned, that are having their weights adjusted to a specific domain, can be put together into a tool chain where each one is an expert at specific tasks. And then we don't have to get into some of the other approaches that are being thrown around, but oftentimes I find it ends up being a combination of the two. So I think having a knowledge graph in the mix, a knowledge base of some sort that can add the context in on demand and still use the off-the-shelf LLMs is another approach that's pretty interesting, and it saves a lot of headache around fine-tuning these models. All right, that's today's webinar. Thank you all for joining, and please reach out if you'd like to have a one-on-one and learn more about how Jaxon can align to your use case. All right, thank you all.